We're going to be joined right now on the ground outside of the White House by Fox News' Lucas Tomlinson. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. A very monumental day in the Middle East. What are we hearing from Biden? What are we hearing more from Washington, D.C.?
Well, it's an historic day, Andy. Great to join you, and that's why President Biden came out to address the American public this afternoon. He spoke for about 8 minutes. He said this is an historic opportunity for Syria now that the Assad regime has fallen. But Biden also cautioned about the risk of uncertainty in the future because a U.S.-designated terrorist group is the one who led the charge on Damascus, a terrorist group known by its initials HTS. And already we're seeing fighting in other parts of Syria between Turkish-backed forces and American-backed Kurdish fighters. In fact, the Turks launched a new round of airstrikes today. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin calling his Turkish counterpart, something to watch there. And you mentioned the U.S. Central Command, those airstrikes. It was a massive one today. 75 ISIS targets in all. B-52 bombers launched, F-15 strike aircraft, A-10 attack aircraft. Over 140 bombs dropped on ISIS. You know, previously you had Russian fighter jets and Assad regime jets flying over central Syria. Now, with Assad out of the picture, it appears the U.S. military wanted to take advantage and led these airstrikes west of the Euphrates River, where some 900 U.S. troops are based right now today in the eastern part of the country. So these ISIS forces, we heard from President Biden in his remarks to the country saying he wants to make sure ISIS remains defeated. Yes, Andy.
Yeah, that is so very true. Good point. And of course, they're saying in a statement saying we will not allow ISIS to reconstitute. And there are so many different factors. ISIS, Al-Qaeda in the region. How much are they paying attention to this region and kind of figuring out what's to go? Because many people pointing to potential civil war in that country moving forward.
There's no question. Remember, for decades, the Iranians have been supporting and propping up the Assad regime. We saw starting in 2015, in the middle of the Syrian civil war, Russian President Vladimir Putin deploying fighter jets and warships to Syria. In fact, the Russians still have those two bases, and it was from that base that the Russians, according to state media, took Assad out of the country. He is now in Moscow, where he's been granted asylum. But you're right, there's a bit of an alphabet soup of different groups in Syria, and certain groups are going to be taking advantage. Certainly, the U.S. military wants to make sure ISIS doesn't reconstitute. Recall, there's tens of thousands of ISIS fighters in a prison camp in eastern Syria. That's why those 900 troops are there, and that's why U.S. jets are orbiting overhead. But now you have Turkey wanting to, of course, this is all, much of Syria. Syria wasn't even a country until after World War I, Andy. The French helped put it together, and this is former Ottoman Empire area land. So the Turks want a piece of Syria, and that's where it's going to be interesting, possibly NATO on NATO violence, at least through proxy.
All right, very good, very interesting. And one question I have before I let you go, and of course, as we saw Biden leave the room, there were questions about Austin Tice, an American journalist that was disappeared 12 years ago near the Syrian capital. Yeah. Are we hearing any more information about Tice and any operation to try to bring him home if they know a location or even if he's alive?
Well, great point, Andy. We did hear from President Biden. He was asked by a reporter about Austin Tice. He's a Georgetown graduate, an American freelance journalist, and a former Marine Corps veteran who's been missing since 2012 while he was covering the Syrian civil war. His family actually came to the White House late this week to speak to Biden. They say they have a source that says Tice is alive. President Biden, when he spoke to people, says he wants to get Tice home. Certainly, with the fall of the Assad regime, this is a possibility that has grown just in the past 24 hours. So a lot of people are hoping to get good news about Austin Tice. Many people in Washington, certainly, and throughout the country, of course, want to see him returned.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate your time, as always. Great breaking it all down on a very monumental day in that region. Thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, thank you so much. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Great conversation, a live look outside of this on this Sunday, just approaching 5 o'clock on the East Coast. And I do want to put up just this post from the Washington Times saying Biden believes the U.S. believes Austin Tice, the journalist, is alive after disappearing in Syria in 2012. So plenty to get to in terms of this. Also, as we're learning that ousted Syrian leader Assad fled to Moscow, received asylum from his longtime ally, the Russian media said on Sunday. All right, let's continue discussing the latest with this new development here. Their regime falling in Syria, the Assad regime falling, a very big day. And I do want to talk more about this. You can see from Trey Ying saying former Syrian President Assad and his family now in Russia, according to state media. We do want to bring in right now senior research fellow at the FDD, David Daoud. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox to detail the latest. This is a big day, and that might be an understatement. What are you hearing? What's the latest in your eyes?
Thank you for having me on. It's a monumental day. I mean, the Assad regime has been in power for 50 years. They withstood the efforts of Syrian revolutionaries to depose them over the course of a brutal civil war. Of course, it was with the assistance of Russia and Iran and its proxies, and those have been severely degraded, as President Biden said. And I think that's what really led to this moment being able to happen. A lot of Syrians, I'm sure, are ecstatic over what's happening, and some have more hesitancy because of the identity of the people who've finally deposed Assad. HTS is a terrorist organization, after all, so it's on our FTO list.
Yeah, that is so very true. And of course, you're seeing some of these scenes, celebrations in the streets in Damascus and beyond after Assad was overthrown, the regime overthrown, fleeing to Russia. Let's get into that a little bit, talking about his relationship with Russia and what it means. Are we surprised that he went to Russia, and how does that change things?
Absolutely not. The Assad regime, even his father, Bashar, Syria has historically been a client state of the Russians. This is why the Russians intervened in 2015. They have interests that the Assad regime, interest in the Middle East, the Assad regime has been securing, namely the port in Tartus and this airbase they have in Khmeimim. This is their ability, the footing for them to project power in the Middle East. So as a 24-year client himself, since he took power after his father passed away, and a 50-year client overall, if not longer, with the Syria itself, they owed it to him in some ways. So it was natural. I mean, that was one of the natural locations that he would have gone. The other would have been Iran or the UAE, which has occasionally served as a kind of a waiting place for deposed dictators.
All right, very good. I do want to ask you about maybe Russia's relationship now moving forward with Syria. How much does that change, and what could this mean for that region as a whole?
I think the Russians are pragmatists. There were reports earlier today that the Syrian regime's flag was taken down from the Syrian embassy in Moscow, which I think is telling. I think they have their interests in Syria, and they'll try to at least work with whomever's in power to secure those interests. The same thing with the Iranians. As much as the Iranians have inflicted damage upon Syria, their troops were on the ground, their proxies were really on the ground, fighting the war on behalf of Assad, murdering hundreds of thousands of Syrians. Now they're trying to pretend that nothing happened. Their officials have said they're willing to work with the democratic process in Syria. And there have even been reports that they're sending out feelers to HTS, which, it's a demonstration of their pragmatism.
All right, interesting to say the least. I do want to get into another point that we were talking about with President Biden coming out and making remarks, also talking about how U.S. forces conducted dozens of precision airstrikes. A post here from CENTCOM talking about this, targeting known ISIS camps and operatives in central Syria, talking about these operations to ensure that ISIS does not seek to take advantage of this current situation. How big in reality is a concern of that for Biden and the United States?
Well, this has been a major concern for us for a while. That's why we have about 1,000 troops positioned in Syria in order to secure these prisoners in Al-Hol and elsewhere, and to prevent the resurgence of ISIS in Syria. I think it's not just us that's concerned. The Israelis are concerned. Now that the regime has fallen, it's not just a matter of the organization itself rising, but perhaps getting its hands on now no longer secured weapons depots, chemical weapons facilities. We know the Israelis have been conducting a blitz of strikes against targets in Syria to prevent these weapons from falling into enemy hands. They've even pushed deeper into the demilitarized zone on the border with the Golan Heights for the first time in 50 years, again, as a demonstration of their concern. I'd imagine we in the United States are equally concerned about not just the resurgence of bad actors, but again, them getting their hands on weapons that would be game-changing weapons.
Yeah, watching and waiting to see what unfolds from the United States perspective. And this feels like it continues to splinter, but something that we've seen in Syria, it's splintering before. What's the likelihood of more unrest, a civil war, a power struggle in that country?
It's hard to say, right? I think right now there's the euphoria of deposing a brutal dictator, and our hearts have to go out to the Syrian people for that. But as we've often seen in different places where these types of revolutions happen, there's always the risk of things devolving, right? The Syrian opposition is not a united entity. It is made up of competing factions, times with competing ideologies. How they decide to apportion power could affect how things shake out. Again, these are also Islamist factions. They're al-Qaeda affiliates that have only taken a tactical distancing from al-Qaeda. If they intend to impose Islamic law on the locals, we're not necessarily, they're traditional people perhaps, but perhaps they don't want to live under the strict rigors of Islamic law. That could lead to friction between the public and their newfound potential rulers. We hope for Syria that they didn't just replace one dictator with new tyrant. We hope it's a better day for them.
Yeah, that is so very true, because you just never know what's going on. And it feels like we've been in this position before in terms of Syria, although it's been maybe the better part of a decade. I do want to talk about Israel and how they factor into all of this, because Trey Ying's putting this out saying the implications of the Assad regime collapse for Israel are huge. The war that you watched unfold over the past year with Hezbollah was made possible in part to Iranian weapons smuggling through Syria by the ground, by air. We spent years tracking these weapon shipments. In terms of Israel and how they are factored into this, if they are a beneficiary of this, what do you make of it?
I think it's in some ways a double-edged sword for the Israelis, and that seems to be how the Israelis are looking at it. There was a statement yesterday from an unnamed senior political official in Israel saying that Assad's our enemy, but his enemies are also our enemy, meaning these militant groups are also our enemy. So the best solution for us is to sit back and watch them deal with each other. And I think that remains the Israeli position. At the same time, what this event does, Syria had served as the vital link between Iran and its central proxy, Hezbollah, for decades. And we need to understand that Hezbollah is the tip of the spear of Iranian regional expansionism. Wherever Iran goes, Hezbollah is there first, laying the groundwork first. This has become the major threat that Iran poses on Israel's borders. So after Israel has spent a year, and then the past 2 months particularly, decimating Hezbollah, again, not past the point of regeneration, but severely inflicting blows on them. And then Hezbollah's lifeline to the east is cut. This puts Hezbollah and the entire Iranian regional project in jeopardy. Wow. But there's also the threat, again, HTS, their affiliates are terrorist groups, they're Sunni jihadist groups. They have no love lost on the Israelis. So the Israelis could be replacing one enemy with the next. And I think that's the fear in Israel.
All right, and my last question before I let you go, because the end-all, be-all, it always comes back to Iran in some form or fashion. How are they viewing this, and what are we watching, what are we hearing from them?
Well, their proxies just withdrew and crumpled. What we saw, though, from Fox News is they're shifting the blame to Assad. And they're saying that, it's not our fault. The resistance did what it was supposed to do. It was the Syrian army that melted away, and Assad became weak because he was listening to the advice of the West, which, again, this is a predictable narrative. At the same time, the Iranians are master pragmatists. They have their interests in Syria. Again, the connection to Hezbollah is just one of them. They're not above working with Sunni jihadist groups. Again, their relationship with Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are perfect examples. They also had a historical relationship with al-Qaeda. Now, the question is, will the sectarian blood that's been spilled between Sunni and Shia be so bad to prevent Iran from pragmatically exploiting a relationship with Syria's newfound rulers, assuming HTS remains in power or fully assumes power. But I think the Iranians are trying to find a way back into Syria because of its vital importance to their regional project.
All right, very good, David Daoud. Thank you so much for joining us. Any other parting words, any other things that you are focusing on before I let you go?
Well, the big issue is Hezbollah in Lebanon. And I think, again, this is a big step towards weakening Hezbollah, assuming all the pieces fall into place. But what we know is that Hezbollah and its masters in Iran are very adaptable. They're very pragmatic, and in time, they could find a way that circumvents the need for Syria to resupply Hezbollah, to rearm Hezbollah, and then the region ends up once again one Iranian domino down, but the others may still survive. Iran will be able to continue projecting power into the region. So keep eyes on Lebanon, keep eyes on Hezbollah's fate in Lebanon.
All right, very good. The Jenga tower, and we'll see how much it takes to crumble, but another piece in this big puzzle. David, thank you again. I appreciate your time as always here on Live Now.
Thank you.